Joe Pyfer versus Jack Hermansson is the main event in this week's Apex fight card. At the beginning of 2024, I wanted to start a series where I would break down and do a prediction for every UFC main event of the year, and considering that I have so far gotten 3 of those predictions correct for the 3 fight cards we've gotten this year, and I haven't made a fight prediction video for any of those, I wanted to start off on the 4th one. And if you don't believe me, here are my bet slips: 4 units on Ankalaev, 5 units on Dricus du Plessis, and 6 units on Nasruddin Imavov. That being said, I think that tonight's main event is actually the most difficult to predict, considering that Jack Hermansson and Joe Pyfer are both quite unpredictable. Joe Pyfer is as of yet still unproven, and Jack Hermansson, while he is a good fighter, sometimes gets himself into some weird predicaments. So let's run through their stats. Joe Pyfer is 27 years old, 6 foot 2 inches tall with a 75-inch reach. Jack Hermansson is 35 years old, 6 foot 1 with a 77.5-inch reach. So 1 inch shorter, 2.5 inches longer in reach. And also notably 8 years older. At 35, while at middleweight they do age slower, it is still a cause for concern with the 8-year gap in age. Let's take a look at their record. Joe Pyfer is fighting in Ring of Combat until he gets into the Contender Series, gets guillotine choked. It's quite notable in 2019. He posts his arm out in a slam against Dustin Soltfus and it shatters, and he has to take a few years off, comes back in December of 2021. So that was 16 months off, 1 year and 4 months off. And he gets a win, gets back into the Contender Series, and then goes on a tear. So he knocks a guy out in round 2 in CFFC, whatever that is. Then knocks a guy out in round 2 in the Contender Series. Knocks out Alan Amadovsky, who, let's be fair, was the sacrificial lamb the UFC brought in for him to knock out. Knocks out Gerald Meerschaert, who hasn't knocked out Gerald Meerschaert at this point, and then arm triangles Abdullah Alhassan in round 2. So out of all of the unranked middleweights, Joe Pyfer is probably the best, easily dispatching Abdullah Alhassan and beating Gerald Meerschaert, who was a notable gatekeeper at some point in his career. Let's take a look at Jack Hermansson. Jack Hermansson is the next level of gatekeeper above Gerald Meerschaert. Why do I say this? He loses to Jared Cannonier. Jared Cannonier then goes on to fight for the belt after a few more years. Beats Calvin Gastelum, heel hooks him in the first round. Then he moves up and he fights Marvin Vettori, a top 5 fighter at middleweight. Unfortunately, what does that say about the middleweight division? He loses a unanimous decision to Marvin Vettori, but it's actually a pretty close brawl. He stays in there for all 5 rounds after getting hurt badly in the first round and puts on a fight of the year contender against Vettori. Then what does he do? He fights Edmen Shahbazyan, gets beat up kind of badly against Edmen Shahbazyan in round 1, and then completely destroys him on the ground in round 2. Loses to Khamzat Chimaev in wrestling. Okay, fair enough. Fights Sean Strickland. Fights him to a split decision. Basically, the exact same thing as Marvin Vettori. Sticks in there for all 5 rounds. Is landing leg kick after leg kick on Sean Strickland, while Sean Strickland is jabbing his face off. What do judges value more? Leg kicks or head strikes? They value head strikes more, thus he loses. This fight probably single-handedly is responsible for Sean Strickland working on his leg kick defense, which has gotten him to the level that we see him now, where he's checking all of Adesanya's and Dricus du Plessis' leg kicks. Then he fights Chris Curtis, easily destroys him. This just reinforces the theory that Chris Curtis is the worst version of Sean Strickland. Then he fights Roman Dolidze, is picking him apart, and then that was a weird one. He kind of goes in for a takedown on Roman Dolidze, and Roman Dolidze reverses it, gets him in a calf slicer, and then starts landing ground and pound from there. I think if these guys fought again, Roman Dolidze would get destroyed. Now he's fighting Joe Pyfer. This is where a footage breakdown comes into play. I don't have time to do footage breakdown. So what am I saying here? Joe Pyfer knocks out guys that are bad. Jack Hermansson loses close fights to guys that are good. Is Joe Pyfer's boxing good enough to do to Jack Hermansson what no one else was able to do to Jack Hermansson, i.e. knock him out? I don't think so. I don't think his grappling is as slick as Roman Dolidze's. I don't think his cardio, takedown defense, or striking is as good as Sean Strickland's. or Marvin Vettori's just pure aggro-ness. I don't think Joe Pyfer has the cardio to keep up with Jack Hermansson, who we know can fight 5 hard rounds, putting on fight of the year contenderships. Do I think that Jack Hermansson is going to be able to finish Joe Pyfer? Possibly. I think that if the Edmund Shabazian fight had gone more than 3 rounds, if it was a 5-round main event slot, I think Jack Hermansson would have been able to finish him on the ground in the 4th or the 5th. That being said, I do think that Joe Pyfer is more physically imposing than Edmund Shabazian, and thus wouldn't be manhandled on the ground to the extent that Edmund Shabazian did. This is what I think is going to happen in the fight. I think that Jack Hermansson is going to basically do what he did to Marvin Vettori, or more accurately, Chris Curtis or Sean Strickland, where he's just battering the legs, throwing jabs, going in with right straights, Wing Chun punches, maybe attempt to clinch every now and then, more probably not, and essentially tire out Joe Pyfer. The reason I think that's going to happen is because I don't see the alternative being more likely than this. I don't see Joe Pyfer systematically beating down Jack Hermansson and finding spots to land big strikes and eventually finishing him. I know that Jared Cannonier did that to Jack Hermansson 5 years ago, but that was a really long time ago. And we also can't look past the fact that Jack Hermansson thought he'd be able to take Jared Cannonier down and was successful in the first round, blew all of his gas tank on that takedown and trying to keep Jared Cannonier down, and then was basically just like a deer in the headlights in the second round when Jared Cannonier was able to come after him. I think that his strategy is going to be different when fighting a, as of yet, untested Joe Pyfer, completely unranked, and I don't see Joe Pyfer's offensive grappling or striking being enough to actually beat Jack Hermansson. All we need to do is look at the Abdullah Alhassan fight, where Joe Pyfer was a little bit more hesitant because Abdullah has good power and Abdullah was being hesitant. Thus, he wasn't actually able to use his striking to great effect and opted for taking Abdullah down and submitting him with an arm triangle in the second round. Is Jack Hermansson going to fall as quickly as Abdullah Alhassan did? I don't think so. And right now, Jack Hermansson is sitting at a plus 190 underdog versus Joe Pyfer at minus 240. Ultimately, my prediction for this fight is going to be Jack Hermansson by decision. And if I was going to wager, which I think I am, I would just wager a single unit on Jack Hermansson, since he is almost a 2-to-1 underdog. And we can compare that to my wagers from other fights of the year, where I bet 4 units on Ankalaev, just because he was such a giant favorite and Johnny Walker had a more than unlikely chance of catching him with something. 5 units on Dricus du Plessis, and 6 units on Nasruddin Imavov, who I was very confident in, and I thought the odds of him at minus 170 were a steal. I think that Jack Hermansson at plus 190 is going to surprise a lot of people and expose Joe Pyfer's cardio and general lack of a game plan. Again, if you need more convincing, just go back and watch Joe Pyfer's fight against Abdullah Alhassan, where he didn't really know what to do when he had an opponent that was unwilling to engage with him. All right, I'll cheers, and I'll be back after the fight to see what I got right, what I got wrong, and what is coming up next. Thank you for watching so much. Please subscribe if you want more, and have a great day.